Grizzly bears are awe-inspiring, but when instincts collide with human activity, the results can be catastrophic. Each year, across forests, prisons, campsites, and even zoos, shocking bear attacks unfold with little warning, leaving behind trails of blood, panic, and survival against impossible odds. From food mishaps to infrastructure failures, these real-life encounters reveal just how thin the line is between wilderness and civilization. In this video, we dive into the most intense, bizarre, and chilling bear attack stories ever recorded. From a prison bloodbath in Russia to a cliffside brawl in Kodiak, prepare for chaos, terror, and narrow escapes. The Amur Correctional Facility sat like a concrete fortress against the endless taiga of southeastern Russia, its weathered walls bearing witness to decades of bitter winters and humid summers. On July 15, 2025, Senior Guard Mikhail Volkov arrived for his morning shift at 5:30 a.m., unaware that this would be his final day on Earth. The 43-year-old veteran of 15 years had grown accustomed to the facility's routine challenges, but wildlife encounters had become increasingly frequent over the past month. Recent flooding from unusually heavy rains had damaged a crucial section of the perimeter fence, leaving a gaping hole that administrators had repeatedly promised to repair but never addressed. The morning began with deceptive tranquility as kitchen staff prepared breakfast for the inmate population. Head cook Yelena Petrov and her assistant Boris Kamensky worked methodically in the loading area near the staff entrance, sorting through deliveries that had arrived the previous evening. Food waste from the previous day's meals sat in large containers nearby, emanating the rich scents that would soon attract an unwelcome visitor from the surrounding wilderness. At precisely 6:15 a.m., a massive male grizzly bear weighing approximately 600 pounds emerged from the tree line and approached the damaged fence section. The animal had been drawn by the persistent odor of discarded meat and vegetables, following scent trails that led directly to the prison's kitchen facilities. For weeks, internal security reports had documented bear sightings along the fence line, with Guard Captain Dmitry Semenov repeatedly requesting wildlife deterrence and immediate fence repairs. His warnings had fallen on deaf ears as budget constraints and bureaucratic delays prevented any meaningful action. The bear squeezed through the collapsed fence opening with surprising ease, its powerful frame navigating the twisted metal barriers that should have kept it at bay. Once inside the compound, the predator moved with purpose toward the loading area where the strongest food odors originated. The early morning shift change meant that several staff members were converging on the same location, creating a perfect storm of circumstances. Mikhail Volkov was conducting his routine security check when he rounded the corner of the loading dock and came face to face with the enormous predator. The bear reared up on its hind legs, standing nearly 8 feet tall, before dropping down and charging with frightening speed. Volkov had no time to react, draw his weapon, or even cry out before the animal's massive paws struck him down. The force of the attack was so violent that it killed him instantly, his body crumpling beneath the bear's crushing weight. The sound of the initial attack alerted Boris Kamensky, who had been unloading supplies from a nearby truck. The 38-year-old maintenance worker turned toward the commotion and found himself staring at a scene from his worst nightmares. The bear, now thoroughly agitated and defensive, spotted the movement and immediately shifted its attention to this new threat. Boris attempted to flee toward the main building, but stumbled over scattered equipment, giving the predator time to close the distance. Yelena Petrov heard the terrified screams from inside the kitchen and rushed outside to investigate. The 52-year-old cook emerged just as the bear finished its second victim and was scanning the area for additional threats. Her appearance triggered another violent response, and despite her desperate attempts to retreat inside, the animal caught her within yards of the doorway. The bear's powerful jaws and claws inflicted fatal wounds within seconds, adding another victim to the growing carnage. Maintenance supervisor Pavel Orlov and his partner Sergei Korolev were performing early morning repairs on heating equipment when they heard the unmistakable sounds of the attack. Both men rushed toward the loading area, believing they could help their colleagues, but instead walked directly into the bear's path. The 45-year-old Orlov attempted to use his wrench as a weapon, but the improvised defense proved utterly inadequate against the animal's raw power. Korolev, witnessing his supervisor's brutal death, tried to escape by climbing onto a nearby storage container, but was pulled down before he could reach safety. The sixth and final victim was evening shift guard Anatoly Rusanov, who had arrived early to discuss scheduling changes with his supervisor. The 29-year-old officer was walking across the compound when he encountered the blood-soaked predator near the vehicle depot. Unlike the other victims, Rusanov was armed and managed to draw his pistol, but the bear's charge was too swift and powerful to stop with handgun ammunition. His weapon discharged harmlessly into the air as the animal overwhelmed him with devastating force. The massacre continued for approximately 20 minutes before armed response team leader Captain Viktor Petrov arrived with 3 additional officers. The team approached the loading area with automatic weapons ready, finding the bear standing over its most recent victim near a row of maintenance vehicles. The animal showed no fear of the armed men, instead rising to its full height in a threatening display. Captain Petrov ordered his men to fire simultaneously, and 12 rounds of high-powered ammunition finally brought down the massive predator. The bear collapsed beside the vehicle depot. Its rampage finally ended, but at a horrific cost. The entire compound was placed under immediate lockdown, while emergency medical teams rushed to the scene, though their efforts could only confirm what everyone already knew. Investigation teams later discovered that internal security reports had documented 17 separate bear sightings near the damaged fence during the previous month, with increasingly bold behavior patterns that should have triggered immediate preventive measures. The facility's failure to repair the fence or install wildlife deterrents had created the conditions for this unprecedented tragedy, transforming a routine morning into the deadliest wildlife attack in Russian correctional history. The Bob Marshall Wilderness Area stretched across more than 1 million acres of pristine Montana backcountry, a vast expanse of untamed peaks, glacial valleys, and dense forests that had remained largely unchanged since the last ice age. On August 28, 2024, 4 experienced backpackers set out on what they believed would be a routine 3-day trek through the wilderness. Sarah Kellerman, a 31-year-old outdoor enthusiast from Denver, had organized the expedition with her longtime hiking companions. Marcus Thornfield, a 34-year-old photographer from Seattle. Rebecca Ashworth, a 29-year-old environmental scientist from Portland, and David Hartwell, a 37-year-old wilderness guide from Missoula. The group had planned to traverse the challenging Rocky Ridge Trail, a narrow path that wound along exposed cliff faces and offered spectacular views of the surrounding peaks. The trail itself was notorious among experienced hikers for its technical difficulties and exposure to sudden weather changes. Cut into the mountainside during the 1920s by Forest Service crews, the path followed a precarious route along limestone cliffs that dropped hundreds of feet into rocky valleys below. The narrow ledges and loose scree made footing treacherous even under ideal conditions, while the surrounding terrain provided perfect cover for wildlife that preferred to avoid human contact. The morning of their second day dawned clear and cold, with temperatures hovering near freezing despite the late summer season. Sarah took the lead position as the group began their ascent toward the ridge's highest point, a challenging section that required careful navigation across loose rock and narrow passages. The hikers moved in a single file, maintaining safe distances between themselves while remaining close enough to communicate about hazards and route-finding decisions. By mid-morning, they had reached the most exposed section of the trail, where the path narrowed to less than 3 feet wide with vertical rock walls on one side and sheer drops on the other. The group was making steady progress when Sarah noticed fresh bear scat on the trail ahead, still steaming in the cold mountain air. She signaled for the others to stop while she examined the evidence, noting the size and content that indicated a large grizzly had passed through recently. Marcus suggested they turn back immediately, but Sarah argued that the bear was likely long gone and that retreat would be more dangerous than continuing forward. The group reluctantly agreed to proceed with extra caution, making noise to announce their presence and keeping bear spray readily accessible. They had no way of knowing that a massive male grizzly was resting in thick brush just 20 feet ahead, having spent the morning feeding on a fresh elk carcass hidden among the rocks. The bear had been wounded 3 days earlier during a territorial dispute with another male, leaving it irritable and defensive. The pain from infected claw marks across its shoulder made it increasingly aggressive toward any perceived threats, while the rich smell of the nearby carcass had triggered powerful protective instincts. When the hiker's voices and footsteps reached its sensitive ears, the 700-pound predator interpreted their approach as a direct challenge to its food source. Sarah was carefully picking her way across a particularly loose section of trail when the enormous grizzly exploded from its hiding place in the brush. The animal's massive form materialized without warning, blocking the narrow path ahead with its hulking presence. For a split second, predator and prey stared at each other across the rocky divide, both frozen by the unexpected encounter. The bear's thunderous roar shattered the mountain silence as it reared up on its hind legs, displaying its full 8-foot height in a terrifying show of dominance. Sarah's training kicked in as she slowly began to back away, but the narrow trail offered no room for retreat. She dropped her heavy pack and raised her arms to appear larger, while desperately trying to remember the proper protocol for grizzly encounters. The standoff lasted only seconds before the bear dropped to all fours and charged with explosive speed. Sarah screamed warnings to her companions as the massive predator closed the distance in powerful bounds. She fumbled for her bear spray, but realized it was clipped to the pack she had just discarded. The animal's first swipe caught her across the chest, sending her tumbling backward into Marcus, who was scrambling to deploy his deterrent canister. The bear's second attack focused on Sarah's exposed wrist as she tried to shield her face. The crushing force of its jaws shattered bone instantly, while razor-sharp claws raked across her forearm. Blood splattered across the rocky trail as she screamed in agony, her companions finally managing to activate their bear spray canisters in thick orange clouds. The chemical deterrent struck the grizzly directly in the face, causing it to retreat several steps while shaking its massive head. Rebecca and David added their spray to the noxious cloud, creating a barrier between the wounded hiker and the confused predator. The bear's aggressive posture gradually shifted to uncertainty as the burning chemicals overwhelmed its sensitive nose and eyes. Taking advantage of the bear's momentary disorientation, Marcus grabbed Sarah's injured arm and began pulling her away from the confrontation. The group retreated down the trail as quickly as the narrow path would allow, leaving their scattered equipment behind. The grizzly watched them go but did not pursue, instead returning to its hidden elk carcass with satisfied growls. The hikers managed to reach a wider section of the trail before stopping to treat Sarah's injuries with their first aid supplies. Her shattered wrist would require immediate medical attention, but the bleeding was controlled enough to allow continued movement. The group activated their emergency beacon and began the long descent toward the nearest helicopter landing zone, forever changed by their terrifying encounter with one of nature's most powerful predators. The Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York had witnessed human habitation for over 12,000 years, with Native American tribes establishing seasonal hunting camps throughout the region's pristine wilderness. On September 14, 2023, David Thornberry and Emily Westbrook arrived at a secluded campsite beside Mirror Lake, planning to spend 3 days photographing the region's spectacular autumn foliage. The 35-year-old nature photographer and his 32-year-old partner had selected this remote location specifically for its distance from established campgrounds and hiking trails. Their chosen spot sat on a small peninsula that jutted into the crystal-clear water, surrounded by towering maples and birches that were just beginning to display their brilliant fall colors. The area had a complex history with black bear encounters, though most interactions remained non-aggressive. Local wildlife officials had documented increasing bear activity throughout the region, as expanding human development encroached on traditional feeding areas. The bears had adapted by becoming more opportunistic in their foraging behavior, often investigating campsites and cabins for easy food sources. Recent drought conditions had also reduced natural food supplies, making human-provided meals increasingly attractive to hungry animals. David and Emily established their camp with practiced efficiency, setting up their lightweight tent on level ground about 50 feet from the water's edge. They arranged their cooking area downwind from the sleeping quarters and carefully stored all food items in bear-proof containers, following established wilderness protocols. Both campers were experienced outdoors enthusiasts who understood the importance of proper food storage in bear country. However, they had no way of knowing that their precautions would prove insufficient against a particularly determined predator. The evening passed peacefully as the couple enjoyed a simple meal of dehydrated pasta and canned vegetables while watching the sunset paint the lake surface in brilliant oranges and purples. They cleaned their dishes thoroughly and secured all scented items in their bear canisters before retiring to their tent around 10 p.m. The night air was crisp and clear, with temperatures dropping into the low 40s under a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch. Their first night passed without incident, but the second evening brought an uninvited visitor. A large male black bear weighing approximately 300 pounds had been foraging in the area for several days, drawn by the lingering sense of human food that even the best containers could not eliminate. The animal had learned through experience that campsites often yielded rich rewards for persistent investigation, and it had developed sophisticated techniques for accessing supposedly bear-proof storage systems. The bear approached their campsite around 2 a.m., moving with the silent stealth that made black bears such effective predators. Unlike their larger grizzly cousins, black bears relied more on intelligence and cunning than brute force when seeking food sources. This particular animal had encountered numerous camping parties over the years and had learned to associate the distinctive sounds and smells of human habitation with easy meals. David and Emily were sleeping deeply when the bear began its systematic investigation of their campsite. The animal first examined their bear canisters, testing the locking mechanisms with its powerful claws and teeth. When the containers proved resistant to conventional attacks, the bear shifted its attention to their tent, where stronger food odors emanated from unwashed cooking utensils and toiletries that had been stored inside. The first indication of trouble came when Emily heard a soft scratching sound against the tent wall near her head. She initially dismissed it as wind-blown branches, but the sound grew more persistent and deliberate. The scratching was followed by heavy breathing and snuffling sounds that sent chills down her spine as she realized they were not alone in the wilderness. David awakened to the sound of ripping fabric as the bear's claws found purchase on their tent's rainfly. The animal was methodically working its way through the outer layer, driven by the increasingly strong scent of food items stored inside. The couple lay frozen in their sleeping bags, hoping the bear would lose interest and move on, but the predator's persistence only increased as it detected their presence. The bear's investigation became more aggressive as it located the tent's entrance and began working the zipper with surprising dexterity. Emily whispered urgently to David about their emergency whistle and flashlight, but both items were stored in the tent's vestibule, now occupied by 300 pounds of determined black bear. The animal's heavy breathing and occasional grunts created a terrifying soundtrack as it continued its methodical assault on their shelter. When the bear finally breached the tent's main compartment, it immediately focused on their backpacks, which contained energy bars, toothpaste, and other scented items. David grabbed his powerful LED flashlight and directed its beam straight into the animal's eyes, hoping to startle it into retreat. The sudden bright light did cause the bear to pause momentarily, but it quickly resumed its search for food with even greater urgency. Emily began banging their metal cooking pot with a spoon, creating loud, clanging sounds that echoed across the silent lake. The noise seemed to anger rather than deter the bear, which turned its attention toward the source of the disturbance. The animal's massive paw swept across the tent floor, catching David's forearm with razor-sharp claws that opened deep gashes from wrist to elbow. The pain was immediate and intense, but David's adrenaline surge allowed him to continue defending their position. He pressed his back against the tent wall while Emily maintained her pot-banging alarm, creating enough chaos to confuse the predator. The bear's natural caution finally overcame its hunger as the combination of bright lights, loud noises, and human scents created an overwhelming sensory assault. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the bear backed out of the tent and disappeared into the darkness. David and Emily remained motionless for another hour, listening for any sounds that might indicate the animal's return. When dawn finally arrived, they discovered their campsite had been thoroughly ransacked, with equipment scattered across a wide area and their tent reduced to tatters. The couple used their satellite messenger to contact emergency services, then began the long hike back to their vehicle, while David's wounds were treated with their first aid supplies. Rangers later tracked the aggressive bear to a daybed about half a mile from the campsite, where it was successfully captured and relocated to a more remote area of the park. The incident served as a stark reminder that even experienced campers could fall victim to the increasingly bold behavior of hungry black bears, adapting to human encroachment on their territory. The remote logging settlement of Berezovka sat deep within the Amur region of southeastern Russia, where the vast Siberian wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions. The region's ecosystem supported one of the world's largest populations of Ussuri brown bears. These massive predators could weigh up to 750 pounds and stood among the most formidable carnivores on Earth. These bears had coexisted with human settlements for decades, but increasing logging operations and climate change had begun disrupting traditional feeding patterns and migration routes. Local officials had documented a steady rise in bear encounters over the past 5 years, with animals becoming increasingly bold in their approaches to human habitation. On October 11, 2024, the settlement's weekly market day brought residents together in the central square, where vendors sold fresh meat, vegetables, and supplies that had arrived on the morning truck from the regional capital. The modest open-air market consisted of a dozen wooden stalls arranged around a gravel courtyard, with canvas awnings providing minimal protection from the elements. The atmosphere was typically social and relaxed, as residents caught up on local news while purchasing necessities for the coming week. Among the regular vendors was Alexei Morozov, a 51-year-old butcher who had operated his meat stall for over 15 years. The stocky, bearded man was known throughout the settlement for his quality products and fair prices, as well as his skill in processing the deer, elk, and wild boar that local hunters brought to his shop. His stall occupied a prime location near the market's entrance, where the rich aroma of fresh meat drew customers from across the community. The morning had begun normally, with Alexei arranging his display of beef, pork, and game meat, while chatting with neighboring vendors about the unusually mild weather. Recent temperatures had remained above freezing despite the advanced autumn season, causing concern among residents who depended on winter's arrival to slow bear activity. The delayed hibernation period meant that large predators were still actively foraging when they would normally be preparing for their winter sleep. At approximately 10:30 a.m., local postmaster Dmitry Volkov noticed unusual movement at the forest edge about 200 meters from the market square. A large, dark shape was moving erratically between the trees, occasionally emerging into clearings before disappearing again. Volkov initially assumed it was a stray horse or cow, but the animal's gait seemed wrong, and its behavior appeared agitated and unpredictable. The creature that emerged from the tree line was a massive male grizzly bear, visibly wounded and displaying signs of severe distress. Fresh scars across its shoulder and flank suggested recent encounters with other bears or possibly human hunters, while its labored breathing and unsteady movements indicated significant pain. The animal's normal fear of humans had been replaced by desperation, as infection and hunger drove it toward the settlement in search of easy food sources. Market customers initially mistook the approaching bear for a large dog, as its unusual gait and distant appearance made accurate identification difficult. Vendor Natasha Popova was the first to realize the true nature of the threat, and she began shouting warnings to the other vendors and customers. Her cries created immediate panic, as people scrambled for cover behind stalls and vehicles, though many remained frozen in shock at the sight of the enormous predator. The bear's attention was immediately drawn to Alexei's meat stall, where the concentrated sense of fresh blood and animal protein created an irresistible attraction. The wounded animal moved with surprising speed despite its injuries, covering the distance to the market in less than 30 seconds. Shoppers fled in all directions as the 600-pound predator crashed through the wooden barriers surrounding the stall area. Alexei grabbed his largest cleaver and attempted to defend his livelihood, but the weapon proved utterly inadequate against the bear's overwhelming size and strength. The animal's first swipe knocked him to the ground, while its massive jaws closed around his torso with crushing force. The attack was swift and brutal, with the bear's desperate hunger overriding any remaining caution about human contact. Market customer Sergei Petrov and his teenage son Pavel had taken refuge behind a delivery truck, from where they witnessed the entire attack. The elder Petrov later described the bear's behavior as unlike anything he had seen in 30 years of hunting, noting that the animal seemed driven by pain and desperation rather than normal predatory instincts. The wounded bear's actions were erratic and unpredictable, making it impossible for bystanders to intervene safely. Local militia officer Viktor Kozlov arrived at the scene within minutes of the initial attack, armed with his standard-issue Makarov pistol. The officer fired 3 shots at the bear from a distance of approximately 20 meters, striking the animal in the shoulder and causing it to release its victim. The wounded predator turned briefly toward this new threat before fleeing back toward the forest, leaving a trail of blood across the market square. Two other market visitors, elderly residents Maria Sidorova and Ivan Krasnikov, had suffered minor injuries while seeking shelter, but Alexei's wounds were immediately recognized as fatal. The settlement's single paramedic, Anna Volkov, arrived within minutes, but could only confirm what everyone already knew. The butcher's extensive injuries were far beyond the capabilities of their limited medical facilities. Police Captain Boris Antonov organized a hunting party to track the wounded bear, following its blood trail into the dense forest surrounding the settlement. The animal was located approximately 2 kilometers from the market, where it had collapsed beside a fallen log. The bear's condition was so severe that it posed no further threat, and the hunters were able to approach safely before ending its suffering with a single rifle shot. Later investigation revealed that the bear had been wounded by illegal hunters several days earlier, with infected bullet wounds that had become severely gangrenous. The animal's desperate approach to the settlement was likely driven by its inability to hunt effectively, combined with the overwhelming scent of fresh meat from the market. Local authorities used the incident to renew calls for stricter enforcement of hunting regulations and better coordination between settlements when dangerous wildlife was encountered. The attack marked the first fatal bear encounter in the settlement's 61-year history, though residents had long understood that such incidents were inevitable given their proximity to prime bear habitat. Alexei's death sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community, where everyone knew each other and violent death was virtually unknown. The market was suspended for 2 weeks, while authorities implemented new safety protocols and wildlife deterrent measures designed to prevent similar tragedies. Kodiak Island stretches across 3,500 square miles of rugged wilderness off the southern coast of Alaska, home to the world's largest subspecies of brown bear. On June 18, 2025, professional wildlife photographer James Lockett arrived on Kodiak Island via chartered floatplane, planning to spend 2 weeks documenting the island's spectacular salmon runs and bear behavior. The 38-year-old photographer from Anchorage had established a reputation for capturing intimate images of Alaska's wildlife, often placing himself in dangerous situations to obtain unique perspectives that other photographers avoided. Lockett had selected a remote stream system on the island's northwestern coast, where annual salmon runs created feeding opportunities that attracted dozens of bears to relatively small areas. The location required a challenging hike across trackless wilderness, but it offered the possibility of photographing bear behavior that few humans had ever witnessed. His planned shooting position was a narrow ledge overlooking a series of waterfalls where salmon congregated before continuing their upstream journey. The rocky outcrop sat approximately 200 feet above the stream bed, connected to the main ridge by a treacherous path that required careful navigation even under ideal conditions. The ledge itself was barely 6 feet wide, with sheer drops on both sides that left no room for error. Lockett had chosen this precarious position because it provided an unobstructed view of the pools below, while theoretically keeping him above the bear's normal travel routes. Local guides had warned him about the unusual density of bears in the area, noting that the previous month had seen several aggressive encounters between competing males establishing territorial claims. The salmon run was reaching its peak intensity, creating feeding opportunities that brought bears into proximity while increasing their stress levels and territorial aggression. These conditions made the area particularly dangerous for human visitors, especially those working alone. Lockett began his photography session at dawn, using a powerful telephoto lens to capture images of bears fishing in the pools below. The morning light created perfect conditions for wildlife photography, with dramatic shadows and golden illumination that highlighted the bears' massive forms. He documented several fishing sequences and territorial displays, obtaining images that would later be recognized as among the finest bear photography ever captured. By mid-morning, he had photographed at least 8 different bears working the stream system, including several massive males that showed clear signs of recent fighting. The animals seemed unaware of his presence on the ledge above, allowing him to document natural behaviors without the stress responses that human proximity typically created. His telephoto lens brought the action close enough to capture intimate details, while maintaining what he believed was a safe distance. The bear that would soon threaten his life was a prime adult male, weighing approximately 900 pounds, with battle scars across its massive shoulders and face that testified to years of dominance fights. The animal had been feeding successfully in the lower pools, but was gradually working its way upstream toward more productive fishing spots. Its movement pattern was bringing it steadily closer to the cliff base directly below Lockett's position. At approximately 11:30 a.m., the photographer noticed the massive bear climbing the rocky slope beneath his ledge, apparently following a game trail that led toward the ridge system above. Lockett initially assumed the animal would continue past his position, but the bear's route was taking it directly toward the narrow path that connected his ledge to the main ridge. Within minutes, he realized that the bear's climb would place it between him and his only escape route. The bear appeared on the ledge behind him with startling suddenness, emerging from the steep approach trail with the silent stealth that made these predators so effective. Lockett found himself trapped on the narrow rocky shelf, with a 900-pound grizzly blocking his retreat and a 200-foot drop awaiting any misstep. The bear's massive presence filled the available space, leaving no room for human movement in either direction. The animal's initial response was curiosity rather than aggression, but Lockett's panicked movements and unfamiliar scent quickly triggered defensive behaviors. The bear began displaying classic threat postures, including jaw popping, ear flattening, and the distinctive huffing sounds that indicated rising aggression levels. Its massive size made these displays particularly terrifying on the confined ledge, where the slightest movement could result in fatal consequences. Lockett attempted to make himself appear non-threatening by avoiding eye contact and moving slowly, but the bear's agitation continued to escalate. The ongoing salmon run competition heightened the animal's territorial instincts, while its natural fear of humans had been reduced by years of dominance over the island's ecosystem. The photographer's camera equipment and tripod only added to the bear's confusion and stress. When the bear finally charged, Lockett raised his heavy tripod in desperate defense, but the aluminum equipment proved useless against the animal's overwhelming power. The bear's first strike shattered his left shoulder and sent him crashing against the rocky cliff face with bone-breaking force. The impact drove fragments of broken ribs into his chest cavity, while opening deep lacerations across his back and arms. The bear's second attack focused on his camera pack, which contained energy bars and other scented items that had attracted the animal's attention. As the massive predator investigated the pack's contents, Lockett managed to retrieve his bear spray canister and discharge its entire contents directly into the animal's face. The chemical deterrent created an orange cloud that enveloped both human and bear in burning capsaicin. The bear's reaction was immediate and violent, with the animal shaking its massive head while backing away from the source of the painful chemicals. The deterrent bought Lockett precious seconds to assess his injuries and activate his satellite emergency beacon, though his broken shoulder made even simple movements excruciating. The bear retreated down the trail it had used to reach the ledge, leaving him alone with his injuries and the reality of his desperate situation. Lockett's rescue required a complex helicopter operation that took nearly 6 hours to organize and execute. The approaching weather and his precarious position made the extraction extremely dangerous, with rescue personnel rappelling onto the narrow ledge to stabilize his injuries before lifting him to safety. His injuries included multiple fractures, severe lacerations, and internal bleeding that required immediate surgery at the Anchorage Trauma Center. The bear that attacked him was later observed by other visitors to the area, showing no lasting effects from the chemical deterrent. Wildlife officials noted that the incident represented typical territorial behavior rather than predatory aggression. However, they used it to reinforce warnings about the dangers of working alone in prime bear habitat during salmon season. The Moravian Wildlife Park had operated in the rolling hills of central Czech Republic for over 40 years, evolving from a small collection of native animals into a respected zoological institution housing more than 200 species. Located 15 kilometers outside the historic city of Brno, the 85-hectare facility attracted nearly 150,000 visitors annually who came to observe European wildlife in naturalistic settings. The park's brown bear enclosure featured a large outdoor habitat with pools, caves, and climbing structures designed to replicate the animal's natural environment. The facility housed 3 European brown bears in separate but connected enclosures, with complex gate systems that allowed keepers to move animals between different areas for cleaning, feeding, and veterinary care. The largest resident was Medved, a 320-kilogram male who had arrived as an orphaned cub in 2010 and had grown into a formidable adult under the park's care. Despite his impressive size and strength, Medved had always been considered docile and predictable, showing none of the aggressive behaviors that sometimes developed in captive bears. On May 6, 2019, senior zookeeper Thomas Novak began his morning routine at 6:30 a.m., preparing breakfast for the park's 3 bears before the facility opened to the public. The 28-year-old animal care specialist had worked with the bears for over 4 years, developing a deep understanding of their individual personalities and behavioral patterns that made safe management possible. His duties included cleaning enclosures, preparing specialized diets, and monitoring the animal's health and well-being. The morning feeding process required careful coordination between multiple enclosures, with strict protocols governing the movement of animals through the gate system. Novak would typically secure each bear in its designated feeding area before entering the adjoining spaces to clean and prepare fresh food. The system had functioned flawlessly for years, with multiple redundant safety measures designed to prevent accidental contact between humans and bears. Weather conditions that morning were ideal, with mild temperatures and clear skies that promised a busy day for the park's visitors. Novak had arrived early to complete his cleaning tasks before the facility opened, allowing him to focus on educational programs and visitor interactions once the gates opened. His methodical approach to animal care had earned him recognition as one of the park's most skilled keepers. The first indication of trouble came when Novak attempted to move Medved from his night quarters into the feeding area, a routine procedure that normally required only a few minutes. The bear seemed unusually reluctant to enter the designated space, repeatedly approaching the gate before backing away with obvious agitation. After several failed attempts to coax Medved into the feeding area, Novak decided to proceed with cleaning the adjacent enclosure while the bear remained in his night quarters. Unknown to the keeper, the gate system's primary locking mechanism had been malfunctioning for several days, occasionally failing to engage properly, despite appearing secure from the control panel. Maintenance staff had noted intermittent problems with the electronic locks, but had not completed repairs due to scheduling conflicts and budget constraints. The facility's backup safety procedures required physical verification of all gates, but time pressures and routine familiarity had led to casual compliance with these protocols. Novak had been working in the cleaning area for approximately 10 minutes when Medved managed to force open the supposedly secure gate through persistent pressure and manipulation. The 320-kilogram bear moved silently through the opening, driven by curiosity about the keeper's activities and the unusual disruption to his normal routine. The animal's natural intelligence had allowed him to identify the gate's weakness and exploit it with methodical determination. The first sign of the bear's presence came when Novak heard heavy breathing directly behind him as he worked near the water drainage system. He turned to find Medved standing less than 3 meters away, blocking his access to the emergency exit. Novak attempted to back away slowly while speaking in calm, soothing tones, hoping to encourage the bear to return to his proper enclosure. Medved's attack came without warning, with the massive bear covering the distance between them in 2 powerful strides. The keeper's protective equipment and training proved inadequate against 320 kilograms of motivated predator, as the bear's initial strike knocked him to the concrete floor with devastating force. The animal's powerful jaws and claws inflicted severe injuries to his head, back, and arms within seconds of the first contact. The attack was witnessed by maintenance worker Pavel Svoboda, who immediately activated the facility's emergency alarm system while attempting to distract the bear with loud noises and thrown objects. Emergency response coordinator Dr. Elena Horakova arrived with a team of keepers armed with fire extinguishers and noise-making devices. The group worked systematically to create sensory distractions that would encourage Medved to abandon his attack without triggering further violence. The rescue operation required nearly 15 minutes to complete, with multiple team members working in coordination to extract the injured keeper while maintaining barriers between the human and the animal. Novak was unconscious when they reached him, with severe injuries that required immediate medical attention. Paramedics had been summoned during the early stages of the incident, allowing them to begin treatment within minutes of the keeper's extraction. The investigation that followed revealed multiple system failures that had contributed to the attack, including the malfunctioning gate mechanism, inadequate maintenance procedures, and insufficient backup safety protocols. Zoo officials later admitted the locking mechanism had malfunctioned days earlier, but had not been repaired. The enclosure was shut down indefinitely pending investigation and structural changes, while Novak remained in critical condition at the regional trauma center.